Hey, and welcome to this episode of the Whole Health with Rob Carney podcast. And on this episode, we have our guest, David Walsh. So, David is the author of the book Poems to Breathe By and to Be Believed By. So, David is an 82-year-old poet, writer, coach, chemistry teacher, football teacher. So he has had a long list of accomplishments, and this book that we talk about in this episode is his first book, which contains over 320 of his writings. So each is composed as a single, standalone writing effort, and as such, he has attempted to categorize his writings into several groupings, in the hope that the reader will find enjoyment and comfort in reading poetry. And I can definitely say I have been inspired to write more poetry by reading this book, by talking to David, and just noticing how he uses many different forms of poetry. So we get into his life, we get into poetry, and we get into everything that he holds near and dear to his heart. So I think you're going to enjoy this podcast. Stay tuned, and here we go. So David, it's been great hearing about you, and it's great to finally meet you. You are the first person I've had my podcast that I've never spoken to before the moment of the podcast. So I'm excited to hear about you. I've obviously read your book, many of the poems in here, Poems to Breathe By and to Be Believed By. So,
Right.
David Andrew Walsh, welcome. And I'd love to hear your story. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I grew up in Rockland. I captained 3 sports teams at Rockland High, and then I went to Bates. I majored in chemistry and went into teaching and coaching, teaching chemistry. And I never wrote a poem until I was 43 years old. And one of my football players died in a car crash, and I was asked to speak at his funeral. And I wrote my first poem and read it at his funeral. And I started writing poems. That was 1981. Like I say, I was in my 40s, and I've been writing them. I've written 750 poems since
Wow. And how old are you now,
then. So
David?
it's I'm 82.
82. You still writing?
I am.
Beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
So what are you doing these days? I know you were
I'm retired. I left teaching after 30 years and I worked at the Mass Turnpike. I was the head of the toll department for 8 years. And then I went back coaching at Blue Hills. That's where I met Ed Madden as a player. And then he became a coach there, volunteer, then assistant coach. And he played in 2000. I went there in 1999. And I finished coaching there in 2015, which completed 43 years of coaching.
Wow.
I was head coach for 21, and I was assistant coach for 22.
Very nice. So obviously football's a big part of your life too. And do you still attend any of the games up there and watch young Eddie coach the boys?
Yes, I do. I do that.
Very nice.
And I wrote a lot of poems about sports, but some, of course, football. But I think more poems were written about my really favorite sport, racing, horse racing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So do you have a background in that? Did you participate in those or more of a
as a better, as a losing better.
That's funny. So David, how would you describe yourself now? I mean, would you consider yourself a poet, a coach? Like what would you use to describe yourself?
Well, I have a business card which has a football picture in the front of one of the Blue Hills teams. And I describe myself as a father, a grandfather, a coach, an athletic director, which I was for 17 years, and also a poet and executive. And I was an executive at the Turnpike for 8 years, and Then I was a janitor for 10 years at a car dealership. That was when I was coaching at Blue Hills. I worked 40 hours a week. And I could coach in the afternoon because my hours were 4 a.m. to noon. And then I had the afternoon to coach. So I coached at Blue Hills for 16, 17 years. So a little bit of a lot of things. And of course, a bettor, as I said, a gambler, I guess I put, a gambler, and a poet. So I've been able to do a lot of things. Lived in the same house here for 54 years.
Wow.
So still married to my first wife.
How long has that been? How long is that marriage?
59 years.
Wow. Congratulations. That's
I
exciting.
guess I'm going to stick with it.
You've gone this far, you know. You're almost at 60,
exactly.
you know.
Yeah.
So David,
and like I say, I never had any desire. And his mother asked me to speak at his funeral. And I ended up writing a poem, which is in the back cover of the book. Inside the outside cover of the book, back cover.
Beautiful.
Chuck. Just a short 2-stanza poem. But then I just started writing poems about everything.
So when you're writing, do you have a specific time of day that you write? It sounds like you're an early bird. Do you like to write in the mornings, evenings, when you're inspired? Do you have a daily practice, or what does that look like for the writing part?
Well, I would say I'm an incredibly fast writer. I get inspired by things that I might see a line or something in a movie or a book I might be reading. And I'll give you an example. I was watching Biography, which was a very, very popular program back, still is, I guess, but and Vincent Price was on, very famous actor, and he was also an artist and lots of talent. And they asked him, he was in his 80s when they were doing this, and they said that if he could summarize his life in a sentence or two, what would he say? And he said, I spent my life visiting friends. And there's a poem in the book called Visiting. And I wrote that instantly upon him saying that. I turned the TV off and wrote that poem in about, I'd say, 30 minutes. And it describes my thoughts of what you might be doing and thinking about using that line. Another example, very similar. I was reading a book written by a Vietnam veteran, and he was describing in detail what it was like being over there for a number of years. And he said, I went back to Vietnam to try to rekindle many of the memories that I had of there. But he said the field was not the field remembered. That was his line in the book. Again, I shut the book and wrote a poem that starts out, the field was not the field remembered, and the breeze was not the breeze. And it just goes on to kind of describe that what you remember because of the time and instance that you were there is not necessarily what you're going to find, 15 years later when you go back to the exact same area. The friends were no longer friends. And it's one of my most, it's on page 182. And if you know that when you read the poem, I think it makes a lot more sense, the poem itself. It's only 3 stanzas, but it's, I think it would be very moving to those that served in Vietnam 3 or 400,000 or however many it was. It was an awful lot. And most of the memories are not good ones. And it's kind of a very moving poem. So I write the poems as fast as I can write, and I kind of use shorthand and such that partial words, and I just kind of keep flowing, because if I lose that inspiration, I usually can't go back to it and finish it. So I almost all of those 750 poems that I wrote were all written in one sitting in probably an hour or less.
Very cool.
Some of them are short, one stanza, and some of them are a couple pages. They're all individual. They stand on their own. There really isn't any direct connection between, any of the poems. And I've written poems pretty much about everything.
So when I was talking to Eddie a few weeks ago, and we were talking about ways to be creative and how we can express that creativity, he was the one that reminded me of poetry. And that's how this whole conversation is coming to fruition, because we were talking about how can we express that creativity better. And when he said poetry, it was something that I used to love to do years ago, and I kind of just fell off. I forgot about it. I got out of the habit. And now recently, since that conversation about probably 6 weeks ago, I've been writing poems again myself and really enjoying the process. And it's very similar to what you said, is that I do it in one sitting. If I get up, I'm not coming back to the same poem. I'm going to come back and write a different poem.
Right.
So I would love to hear just kind of a little bit more about what type of poems do you enjoy writing about the most? Like, is there a specific genre? Because I know you said you've written about a lot of things, but is there anything that gives you the most joy when you're writing about it?
Well, I'm sitting on my back porch right now. And I wrote a poem sitting pretty much exactly where I'm sitting now. And the name of the poem is Caw. In the back of my book, I have a listing of the poems in alphabetical order. And you have a copy of the book, so it's on page 156.
56.
156.
Would you like to read it out loud for everyone listening?
I would, because I was sitting down here at 6 o'clock in the morning with my oldest grandson, and he and I were having breakfast. And he was 3 or 4, and a crow came and landed on the railing of the porch. We were just inside the door. I'm actually on the porch at the table, but we were with the door open, so with the screen, and the bird landed and started crowing. And I explained to my grandson about how smart crows are. They're by far the most intelligent birds, and some of the most intelligent creatures on Earth are crows. Did you know they could talk like a parrot? Crows?
I did know that.
You did, yeah. And they put them through trials, and they're incredibly intelligent and solving out puzzles and things, or how to get at food, and et cetera, et cetera. Here's the poem that I wrote at that sitting with my grandson sitting there. I'd say in like a half an hour. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
I talked to a crow yesterday, so black, its shining coat. He had so many things to say. A caw, 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 each note. He flew right up on that limb, the one so near the porch. I learned as I listened to him, his voice served as his torch. He seemed so magic, as I recall. He stood up tall, head cocked. He had the flair of knowing all. As another's call he mocked. He knew where rabbits had their holes. He shared the owl's retreat. He knew each creature's daily roles. He knew just where to eat. He seemed so mocking with his voice, that crowing, caw, 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 each morning making known his choice from what each night he saw. He wondered about strawmen with hat, the one that moved with corn. If he'd just leave, I'd end up fat. Just fly right there each morn. I talked to a crow yesterday. He was my friend, day breaking. I was alone, no need to pray, a brand new friend for taking. He told me stories no one knew, like who in the woods to trust. I listened to him and all was true, and out my arm did thrust. He landed close and lowly said, so no one near could hear. There are few things in life to dread, hardly anything to fear. I hope to see him again soon. I'll use his help for free. Perhaps he will explain the moon. You see, I'm only 3. Tell why the sun at night not there. Why thunder makes them roar. Tell why some people have a pair. All this before I'm 4. I talk to those crows all the time. Deep thoughts they do have stored. And if I lose that caw-caw rhyme, I'll ask the Indian in the cupboard. End.
Beautiful. I love it. And I love the story behind it as well. Thank you for
I
sharing.
wrote that July, all my poems are dated. I wrote that July 17th, 1995. My oldest grandson was 4. And he is one of the reasons that I wrote this book. I've been writing these poems now since 1981, so we're coming up to 40 years. And he called me and asked me what I was going to do with all my poems when I died. And I said, why? Would you like them? And he said, yes, I would. I said, okay. Now, I hadn't written any book. They were just in a wash tub, a plastic wash tub, 750 original poems, all handwritten on white paper, some printed, some in cursive. By the way, none of my grandsons can read my poems that are written in cursive because they don't know how to read cursive. So when I sent them some, my daughter would say, well, I read the poems to the boys. I said, why couldn't they read them themselves? They don't read cursive. So I started printing them. And then I had a heart problem, a severe heart problem, quadruple bypass surgery I needed. And it was actually exactly 2 years ago this week, might even be this day, that I went to the St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Boston and survived that surgery and made up my mind that I was going to write my book. And my middle daughter, I have 3 daughters and a son, she helped me a tremendous amount. And it took me 5 months because I don't type. I learned how to use I talk to the machine and it prints it out, like magic. So it took me a long, long time. I did every one of these poems, typed it, and took a long time. And I'm very, very proud. I still have those 323 poems in this book, and that's only less than half of my poems. So hopefully I'll get inspired enough to put the rest of them in a second book.
Beautiful. Well,
I already have the title picked. Cool Breezes and Other Zephyrs That Knew Me.
I like it.
That's the title of my second book.
I like it.
Now you have to understand that I'm a chemistry teacher, a chemistry major. I never took an English course about writing, of any kind of writing, and it's definitely not of writing poetry. I'm not sure where I learned to do all of this. That I never read any book on when I started writing these in earnest. I then did get a couple of books that I read on instructions and consonant rhyming and all types of things that I was already doing, but I didn't know it. And it's a talent. It's a God-given talent, and I'm glad I was able to put it to use. I had this book printed at Blue Hills Regional High School. They printed it for me for $7 a copy, which is incredibly low amount. And I had 300 printed, and I've sold them all. But I only charged $10, which some of them I had to mail, which cost $3. So some I didn't make any profit at all, and I didn't sell them to make profit. I sold them so some people would end up reading some of my poetry. By the way, Call was on page 156, and Visiting, which is the poem that I explained to you about, the biography thing, is on the next page, 157. These are not in they're not, they're all dated, but it was a challenge to take 323 poems and pull them out of that laundry basket and then try to put them into categories. And that's in the front. It's in like 12 categories. Like Places and Dreams of Love was one category. And some of these are also song lyrics. I've written about 40 songs, the lyrics and the music. The trouble is, I don't know how to play any instruments. I don't know how to write music, and I don't know how to read music. So they're all in my mind, the music. The words are written down, but maybe someday I'll be able to. I sing at weddings and things like that, not in the church, but.
Well, you're sharing your art, and that's the important part. And there is
Right,
actually
exactly.
there's actually another poem that I would love to have you read and also get your backstory on. So on page 80, it's called "The Man," and I read this one this morning, and I'd love to hear the story behind it. And if you would like to read that
Well,
to everyone
it's a
listening.
very, very nice story behind this. I wrote this and read it for my youngest daughter at her wedding. She is a horsewoman. She went to the University of Mass and majored in horse management, etc. She owned at one time a few horses, and I wrote this, and like I say, I read it along with the page. The other page is next to it, 81, is Love, and I wrote both of those for her wedding. And I have two older daughters, and actually they read them at the wedding. One daughter read The Man, and the other daughter read Love. And so that's the background of the poem. Okay, so far? Clear enough?
Clear enough. Would love to hear you read it for everyone listening.
Okay, so here we go. And the man said, "How much for that horse?" And the couple said, "Oh, you see, that horse is not for sale." And the man said, "Everything has its price, and I shall offer you such a bargain so that no one could refuse the offer. Enough money so that when you do, whatever you like." And she said, "We have the sun, fresh air, the night's breezes, and the moon to share. We already have our bargain." And the man said, "You do not understand. To you, the offer I shall make will create for you a path of the riches of the world, and you will not want again." And he said, "We don't desire riches. We have our own, to go where we want, to mow and bale the hay, to glisten with the river, to fish the shores, to hike and be free of the troubles your money will buy. And the man said, I will return next year and I will buy your horse. And you receive my price and realize that it is indeed the bargain I have made it out to be. And together they said, go and do not return. But we know what we desire, and it is not tall buildings, busy traffic, fine dwellings, and the debts of being rich, but rather this morning's sunrise, the fresh air of evening, the liquids of life, the dew, the sap, the rain, the snow, clouds and sky, rivers, lakes, and oceans, as each day shall come, and we'll have each other, and we shall share all of nature's gifts and each other, and in a year you will still be seeking your life's bargain, for we together have found ours. This wedding took place in a field in Vermont in September. It was absolutely beautiful, and the man said,
Beautiful. I love it. Yeah, that was one that really stood out to me. And of course, I had to ask the backstory because that makes it even that much more special. And I think that that's what's really unique about poetry is that it tells a story, but the person reading it is going to have their own interpretation. So it's always interesting to hear what the artist had in mind when they were writing it. So thank you for sharing that.
yeah, it used to be a real no-no to do that. And I've spoken at Holbrook High School to the English advanced placement classes for the last 3 years because my son teaches there, teaches science there. And the trend now is more of the reader wanting to know the background of the poem rather than the poem standing on its own, 2 legs. And so that was interesting for me to find out. However, if I tried to explain each of the 323 poems in this book, that book would probably be 1,000 pages, and you
Yes,
would
it
have
would.
time to be reading the poems. So it's also interesting to see what the reader gets from the poem, and I'm sure sometimes it's much, much different than what I had in mind when I wrote it. However, it's interesting sometimes with these poems, I know exactly where I was, who I wrote it about, and etc. And other poems I don't even remember writing because remember, it's 40 years. So if I wrote one like 35 years ago, and although when I went through this book this morning, I kind of breezed through it just to see some of the poems that I might note. I remember most of them and where I was and what it's about. And a lot of them are based on something I might see. Just for example, there was an ad a couple of years ago about Christmas, and it was called Open Your Heart to Everyone. And I used that Open Your Heart line to write a poem about Christmas. And I've written probably 15 or 20 poems about Christmas, Christmas time, Santa Claus, things like that. It's a pretty popular time for poetry with cards and so forth.
Well, with the topic of Christmas, there was another one here called The Ride on page 83 that was published on December 22nd, 1997. So I would love to hear you read that one and
Okay,
share
now
the story of that.
let me explain that. Have you got that poem in front of you?
I do.
It has no stanzas.
Hmm.
I put a little aid in there with an exclamation point. Actually, there are 4 exclamation points if you look down the list. They're done in a sextet, 6 lines. The first, second, and fourth lines rhyme, and the third, fifth, and sixth lines rhyme. And then that repeats 4 more times. Understand what I'm saying?
I do.
Okay, so I've written about, maybe in this book, 20 or so poems that are written in this style. Of course, it's a little tougher because you got to get 3 words that rhyme, not 2.
Mm.
And you got to do that twice each 6 lines. So you start to, if you don't understand that, it takes you a while to read that before the rhyming makes any sense. So at any rate, I will do that. Blinking, blinking, oh so far, shrinking, shrinking, fading star, taking turns on moonless night, then to fade so far from sight. If only angels move the jar that spilled and made you as you are. See, then that ends that 6 lines. So now we're going to start the next 6 lines, which is a whole new rhyming pattern. Are you from that spot in space, winking, blinking, codes to trace? Is there a hand set you twirling through dark spaces, whirling, whirling? Does the brightness hide your face? Is there a love to yet embrace? Icy, icy is your heart, just a wink as you depart, just a gaze and then you're gone, never ever relied upon, leaving bright traces as you dart, if I be but a simple part. Does the tender touch provide? Are there others where you ride? Skyward trace, oh take me there, before all others soon will dare, before our paths too soon collide, life's journey's gone, the other side. Maybe you're in heaven then, huh?
Yeah, that was my interpretation.
Maybe.
I
Of
love
course,
that one.
yeah, it's some other people have called that out that I've sold the book to, that have written me a note and, listed down 4 or 5 or 6 poems that they really enjoyed. And it's, if you look on the back cover, do we have more time, or what's our time situation here?
So we go for a few more minutes here, maybe another 5-10 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, have you got it open to the back cover?
Yep, I got it here.
See the woodchuck? The woodchuck, the top,
Yep,
now inside cover.
inside cover, got it. Yep, woodchuck.
That's written as the same kind of rhyming as I just read. The ride, the woodchuck,
Got it. Very
same
cool.
thing. My father and brother spent half their life trying to kill these woodchucks that kept eating their gardens. And anybody that's planted a garden would thoroughly enjoy that poem, The Woodchuck. However, the reason that I went to this back cover was the picture that's there.
Mm.
It's my granddaughter. I only have one. I have 7 grandsons,
Mm.
1 granddaughter, and she's the last. She's the youngest. So I found this picture of her sitting at Minot Beach in Situate. And when she was 9, I showed this to her. She's 3 in the picture. I said, do you remember this picture? She said, yes, I was with my aunt and we were down in Situate. And I was with my teddy bear and sitting on those rocks. And I said, well, I've written a poem about this picture. And she's 15 now. I'm going to put my glasses on. I struggled through that last. So here's the poem I read, and the name of the poem is A Granddaughter. Not my granddaughter, but a granddaughter. Because I want anybody that has a granddaughter or wished they had one to be able to enjoy this poem as they read it and relate to a little girl with dungarees with holes cut in it, as she appears. I wonder where she'll travel. I wonder who she'll be. So curse the day I go away. Hope she'll remember me. Would the teddy dare not listen? Instructions through an ocean glisten. Do you suppose the tide just rose? Are any parts among the missing? Hope the days remain all sunny and the jokes she'll tell are funny. Hope that smile remains a while, trading stuffed bears for a bunny. Jack be nimble, Jane be quicker. Candles on her cakes will flicker. I still recall, small as a doll, never mistaken for a city slicker.
Wow,
That might be my favorite poem.
that is beautiful. That really is. I hope that she will continue to read that as she grows up, because that's
Exactly.
something special.
Exactly. Yep.
Wow.
I sometimes write poems about pictures. They inspire me. Of course, my interpretation of any famous painting really would be my own, because I would have no idea what kind of painting it is or who painted it, because I'm really not into that. But the other poem on that page is called Old Friend, and it's about my roommate from college.
Hmm.
And the other poem on that page, it just seems to fit into the pattern, I suppose, of all his poetry. My daughters used to bring a lot of their friends home to our house. And a vast majority of them being girls, a lot of them did not live with their fathers. They were either from divorced homes or their fathers had died. And so I was all of those girls' fathers.
Hmm.
And they all called me dad.
Hmm.
And they still come back and I still see them. And some of these are written not so much by name about them, but just in general. I was able to supply them with a need where if you don't have there's a poem in here called Fate. I'm looking at the back listing here. It's on page 154. Now, this is not written about anybody that I generally know, but it's just a life situation that happens to a lot of people. The grass grew up the old front stair. The walk had cracks anew. Yet I remember with great flair right there were me and you. Green hedge so high and ragged, the window shade all pale, and the lamppost glass all jagged, old sign that read, for sale. Chimney bricks with plaster loose, roof shingles bare from wind. The story old, but what's the use? Trying figuring who sinned. Was it those with money strong? Hard days, all had to work. Another month moved life along, saved up to pay bank's clerk. In winter the stove to keep warm, so what? Four to a bed. Down each night angels did swarm, in answer to prayers said. In summer's heat, crops all green, those cows to milk and feed. Neighbors were scarce and seldom seen, maybe poor, but never in need. Then it happened in a flash. We had little to show but pride. In the ocean of life, merely a splash, the night that Daddy died. Death, with no warning, sharp and quick, there and then, quietly gone, arms so strong, never been sick, 40 years from when he was born. The boards are loose, chipped of paint, field all grown up with brush. In heaven they claim one more saint, but there's no understanding the rush. the memories fading, but still creates the heartache one never could hide. Was it the Lord, life's twisting fates, the night that poor daddy died?
Wow.
Fortunately, that kind of thing never happened to me, but maybe in the back of my mind, I was thinking of those girls and how I became their father.
Sounds about right. Well,
Yep.
David, thank you so much for sharing your art, for sharing your time, and just for expressing yourself as fully as you can. What's the name of your book? Where can people get it? Anyone listening to this, how can people get a hold of this book?
Okay. My address is, I guess, the best way, because I'm just selling them one at a time. I've sold these. I have actually 25 left out of the 300 up in a spare bedroom. And if they write me, give me their address, phone number, I'll make touches and I'll go on from there. I'll make sure that they receive a book. My address is 458 Brook Street in Hanson, 02341. And my telephone number is 781-293-9296. We don't always answer the phone when strange phone numbers come up because we get so many harassing calls, but I have an answering machine. And so I guess the safest way would be just drop me a line with your name and address, phone number. I'll make contact with you.
Wonderful.
I
Well,
was
David,
supposed to read at the Hanson Library this spring, but everything like that has been canceled. So I really haven't done anything public other than word of mouth. Blue Hills, a lady over there, has probably sold about 25 of my books just herself. I bring her 5, she sells them. I bring her 5 more. She's just amazing. So it's very difficult to go Amazon and all these different ways of. Most of the money, if any, is made at all, doesn't go to the author. So I'd appreciate hearing from anyone who might be interested.
awesome.
I think they're pretty good, a lot of them. I keep it right by my chair. I enjoy reading my own poems, and I read them at least a couple times a week, because some of them sat in that famous laundry basket for 25 years and no one read them. So
Wonderful.
I'm glad to share the talent that I do have, and hopefully my grandson will take care of these after I'm gone. Probably I plan on living about another 15 years.
There we go. I like the
80,
there we go. I like it.
80, yeah, 82. I think I can make mid-90s. Why not?
Yeah, why not? Thank you for inspiring me to get back on poetry, and thank you for sharing everything, David. Have a beautiful day, and hope to meet you in person very soon.
Yeah, when we're allowed to mingle again.
Absolutely. Well, we'll get
Take
in
care.
touch with Eddie and talk soon, David. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too, Rob.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Whole Health, the Rob Carney podcast with our guest, David Walsh. So to get your copy of the Poems to Breathe By and to Be Believed by David Walsh himself, you can call him at 1-781-293-9296, and he will give you your copy personally. As he said, he tries to avoid going through Amazon. It's the easiest way for him, and it's also the best way we can support a local artist. So I'd love for you to give him a call there, check it out, and that's the best way to get in contact with him. And as always, this podcast is brought to you by our superfoods. Superfoods are something I use before every podcast, after every podcast, before I work out, before I go to bed, when I wake up. It's just a great way to get really nutrient-dense foods into our body very conveniently. So 2 of the companies I work with the most are Purium and Mushroom Revival, and both of those are all organic products, great superfoods with sustainability practices in place. So Purium will be the first to be plastic free by 2021, and Mushroom Revival plants one tree for every product grown and use a lot of recycled and biodegradable materials in their shipping process and growing process. So you can use the code wholehealth at ishopPurium.com and mushroom-revival.com to save $50 on your first Purium order and 15% on every Mushroom Revival order. And one of the newer groups that I started working with is called Aries Tech. So with the rise of EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies like 5G, 4G, Wi-Fi, LTE, all those things, these are transformers which help to transform the waves of the EMFs into something that's more digestible by the body, so it's not wreaking as much havoc on the body. And essentially EMFs are really limiting our body's ability to absorb oxygen. So obviously oxygen is very important, and we want to prevent that by really using transformers, limiting our EMF exposure, but in a very digitally connected age, just a very convenient way to have some of that protection on you at all times. So check that out, ariestech.com, code wholehealth will save you 10%. Thank you everyone for listening. Stay tuned for the next one. Peace.